So hey, I'm Kate Compton. I'm going to be giving a presentation today called Casual Creators. This is a summary of some of my dissertation research on casual creativity and why we should help casual people be creative with software, including games. And yeah, I'll just get right into it. So if you're interested in this, you can do some more reading. I have short zine forms of this information, so you can print out a zine. I also have a really giant dissertation at the link at the bottom, but the zine form is honestly like much more readable, so I recommend that. So a little bit about me. I did 5 years on Spore and SimCity at Maxis, plus some canceled properties. I just finished 7-ish years of a PhD in how to make this stuff. I've done contracting for chatbots and 3D printing apps and all sorts of other stuff. I'm probably most recently famous for making Tracery, which is a language that now hosts probably about 10,000 bots, depending on how many Twitter is canceled, many of which were made by artists and philosophers and kids and journalists, so I'm very proud of that. I make tools for people to get into PCG, and I really like helping people start out with PCG and figure out where to go from there. And also I've made just like a ton of weird prototypes and generative stuff. Generators, more generators. But I started, one of the fields that I've been spending some time in is what's called computational creativity. So computational creativity is the idea that you get computers to do things that humans would label as creative. You'll often see a lot of really terrible videos or articles about like, oh, we made the world's first drawing robot. And drawing robots actually go way back to like the 1700s, things with camshafts that could draw or write fairly complex stuff. But people are still making cool drawing robots and getting computers to draw complex geometric shapes as well. The one on the upper right, I believe, is from the late 60s. So this field is really interested in computers and how we get them to be creative. And we often see headlines like this, like movie written by algorithm turns out to be hilarious and intense. AI composed a song, AI painted a picture. Oh, look, AI is selling paintings at Christie's. And this is, these headlines are kind of fictional, or they're kind of myth-making. AI is making these things, but often it's humans using AI as a tool. The humans will have the AI generate 1,000 things and then pick out the ones that they like, or they will very carefully feed the AI certain things in order to get the effect that they want. The term that I really like for this, sometimes it's called, when you have these kind of mixed platforms of half human, half AI, they're sometimes called cyborg, but I like the term centaur. So that a human plus an AI is actually stronger than either a human or an AI. One of my favorite examples of this was the where you see the headline about the movie written by an algorithm. Yeah, the movie was written by an algorithm. Then humans curated which one they actually wanted to see, probably edited it a bit, and then they took that script and then did very human like improv acting on top of it. So the movie is not something that an AI made, it's something that like a group of human improv actors used as a prompt to make a cool improv scene. So computational creativity, there's a bunch of cool conferences and information about this online that you can go to. They're interested in ideas like, can computers be creative? And defining creativity in a way that we can actually detect creativity. So often they say something that is creative is useful and novel. Of course, that asks the question of what is useful? Is this painting useful? And what is novel? If the computer creates a novel painting and then proceeds to make 100,000 more of those, do they continue being novel? And often these systems will make vast quantities of generative content. And so what's the difference between a computer that can each time make an interesting creative work and a computer that can make 100,000 things, and if you get a human to comb through all those 100,000 things, they can find one that looks kind of interesting. If I pull letters out of a Scrabble bag and there's a possibility that it would generate an interesting sentence or at least a funny word. Is that being creative or not? And then the final question that they really get into is, was the computer being creative or was the programmer? So I do a lot of things with Twitter bots, and I think for Twitter bots, I consider that people being creative through generative processes. I would not usually say like, oh, Lost Tesla or especially things like Infinite Scream. Oh, they're so like those bots are so creative. It's like, no, the people who made those bots were creative through this medium. It's like you don't say that a play tells a really good story, or you might say that a play tells a really good story, but what you really mean is Shakespeare told a really good story. So yeah, there's this whole question of, are computers creative? And this is the point where I usually nope out of computational creativity, because I'm not actually that interested in the question of, are computers creative? Because computers, algorithms, bots, whatever you'd like to call them, lack two things that I'm pretty interested in, which is feelings and money. So humans have feelings and money, so I'm more interested in, are humans creative, and how can they be creative? So yeah, are humans creative? I think we can all answer the question that, like, yes, humans are creative. We have lots of famously creative humans doing creative things all the time. But I think the question is also, more interestingly, when are humans creative? I like to think that all humans have a creative urge. It often gets squashed out of us at an early age. So there's some very interesting research that's done on around the age of 8 to 12. So if you ask a group of 8-year-olds, how many of you can dance, how many of you can paint, how many of you can tell stories, they'll all raise their hands, because they read can you as, are you physically able to? Do you know how to? Like, can you move your body with wiggles and call that dancing? And then from the ages of 8 to 12, you realize that can you means, do you have permission to do this well? Do you do this well enough to have permission to do it at all? You can dance, but you shouldn't dance. You can paint, but you shouldn't paint. You can tell stories, but you shouldn't. And so by the age of 12, everybody will start sitting on their hands when you ask that question. You could try this experiment with your friends and ask them, who can draw? And in a group of 26-year-olds, like, very few of them will actually say yes, even though they could all draw when they were 8, but something else happened. So yeah, we learned pretty quickly that you suck at creativity. And so how do we get people back to kind of this 8-year-old certainty? Let's see, this thing is flashing at me. Okay. So yeah, when are humans creative? We know we actually don't know a lot of stuff about what makes people creative, like the sort of like grand creativity of like a Picasso, but we know a lot about what makes people uncreative. And there's a bunch of like self-help guides of how do you get yourself back to being creative through tackling the things that are making you uncreative. It's usually about removing blocks than it is discovering new forms of creativity. And again, kind of quashing that thing that tells you that you are in fact not good at this. So yeah, what role can AI play in this? So we can figure out what helps people feel creative, makes them feel not creative, when computers can help with it. And I'd like to talk a little bit today about why AI support works even better in casual creators than in professional creativity tools. And the question of the talk is really, how do we combine all this together to make computational assistance for casual creativity? So we know that computers can do lots of cool things. They can bomb people and shoot people and hopefully rescue people from disaster situations. So if we can have automated AI soldiers, automated AI judges, automated AI insurance adjusters, can we have an automated AI art teacher? Can AI help people be creative? Can we make an AI Bob Ross? Or an AI kindergarten art teacher who tells you that you're good? So to do this, I look a little bit into what we know about creativity. And again, there's a lot of studies of creativity. This sort of when I first started talking about my research, I had a couple of people push back on me saying, like, you can't study creativity. It's just a magical thing that happens. If you look at creativity through a scientific lens, it like ruins the magic. And this is not true. We actually can think lots of really cool thoughts about creativity. there are things like, there's a whole bunch of different frameworks. So we, probably around the 1920s, people started discarding the, like, creativity is a magical thing that happens when somebody is in an attic for long enough, just being alone with their thoughts. And there are things like P&H creativity, which is personal and historic creativity, and big C and little c creativity. These are both ways to understand, oh, sorry, there's something is flashing on my UI, so I'm gonna like try to open, oh, it's chat. Can I open chat? Yes, okay. Cool, I kinda wanna have chat open, wait. Gosh, this UI is very exciting. Okay, well, hopefully I can also, I can use both of these. Sorry, it's just hard to, things are eating my mouse clicks and I'm not sure how. Anyway, so big C and little c creativity, P and H creativity, both kind of divvy up creativity into, yes, well, we know there's Picasso or Georgia O'Keeffe on one side, but we also say things like, oh, my niece is so creative, or like, that was such a creative use of a paperclip, or what creative fashion you've got today. And then things like 4C creativity, that's another framework that says, well, okay, there's the creativity of, you're working in the games industry and it's technically a creative industry, but all you do is like explosion effects all day long to specifications from your boss. There's also the Picassos. There's also, I like doing art in my spare time. And there's also like getting very creative with your taxes. So those being kind of 4 different areas of, like 4 different ways to define creativity. And each of those have kind of different conditions and different ways to support them. 2 of the other frameworks that I really like are kind of getting out of the creativity is something that happens in a person. So Csikszentmihalyi says, he has some work on creativity that describes it as environmental creativity. So creativity can't happen in one room. You actually have to have a domain. So you have to have like a field, or like you have to have some subject that you're working in. So if I'm doing oil painting like has certain material conditions that I have to work within. I also have a field. So I have experts and I have collaborators and I have nemesis and I have people who are going to view my work. And so I'm in a constant conversation with what's come before me, what's going to come after me, and how other people are solving this problem. And it's through this sort of churn that creativity happens. There's also the idea of embodied creativity, which is pretty intuitive to anybody who's done creative work before. Is you start working with your hands and the pot starts pushing back, or you start writing a story and it's often said that when you're writing a story, your characters start pushing back at you. Like the characters say, no, that's not my dialogue. So when you're actually engaging with the creativity that you're making, the artifact itself pushes back. And this is kind of the idea of thinking with your hands. And that you can't be, like in this case, you can't be creative in your own head because you don't have an artifact to think with. There's a couple of cool projects that play with both of these ideas. This one is something like, it's covered up by the UI of Zoom, but Ekamanati's discussion of, or research on how the French Impressionists, it turns out, like even when we talk about Van Gogh, who is often talked about in isolation because he was in a mental institution and then like kind of recovering in the countryside, he was in constant communication. He was sending paintings back and forth with his friends in Paris. There was no isolation going on when he was making his grand masterpieces. He was just constantly talking to other people that he had met while staying in the slums of Paris. And so this is a study of cohorts of people who were all creative at about the same, all living together. And isn't that interesting that it turns out great creativity happens in clusters of people, not in isolated people. And then this is an AI project that was done in 2001. It's called the Digital Clockwork Muse. And this was the idea that we can apply one of these theories of creativity. The one on the right is called the hedonic curve. This is one of my favorite illustrations. It's the idea that when I'm looking at a creative work, I have not only myself, but I have all of my past experiences of creative work. So if I'm really into classical music, I have lots of knowledge about classical music. But if I'm really into black metal, then I have a lot of black metal that I'm looking at. And if I am really into black metal and you give me classical music, there's not enough there for me to care about, and vice versa. So this is the idea that if something is too close to what I like already, it's boring. So it's kind of neutral. If it's too far away from what I've seen already, it's weird and I hate it. And if it's just far enough away from what I like to be unfamiliar, but still has things that relate to what I'm interested in, that's very interesting. So that's got a higher hedonic value. And so they made a lot of little simulated artists and released them in a little virtual art experiment. And that's the illustration on the left. And they found that, in fact, yes, they do form little clusters. They form these little groups of surrealists and fauvists and cubists that are all kind of into each other's stuff, but far enough away from each other that they're not stepping on each other's toes. And that as new artists would appear in the simulation, new clusters would emerge. Like suddenly there's an Andy Warhol and everybody's like, that's what I want. And they cluster over by the Andy Warhol. So yeah, thanks, I hate it is actually on this graph. Things that are close enough to what you like that you can actually like have strange feelings about them. So yeah, the thing that I'd like to argue is that theories of creativity actually influence what kinds of tools we make. Do we make things that have massive numbers of options, or do we have things that have like limited number of options but kind of more specialty pieces? So one of the motivating things behind my research is a lot of this research on creativity is done for professional creatives. A lot of it is funded by the military. They're really interested in, just seeing if I had more comments. So it's funded by the military, and there's, like the military is just really interested in like, oh, can people design missions better? Can people like design better bombs? Can people design better whatever? They're very interested in like professional grade creativity. Like you have to be able to make anything. And so, but even when we're talking about like software design, people want to support the Beethovens and the Georgia O'Keeffes and the great virtuosos. And so they'll do things like, you know, it's a particular use case if you're supporting professional creativity. The tool needs really high flexibility and range. You have to be able to make literally anything, and you have to be able to change anything. So if you're making a song or making a piece of art, and your boss says, I need this to be, like this pixel here needs to be a little bit more red, or your own genius says this pixel needs to be a little bit more red. You have to be able to be like, you have to be able to make that change. It's okay if there's a high barrier to entry, like of both money and time, because hey, this is a job. You need to be like, if you're serious about 3D modeling, then you have to be able to survive Blender's on-ramp, which is significant, or you have to be able to pay $3,000 for Maya, because hey, you're getting paid for this. I would like to posit that this is not the only way that we can do creativity. This is one really useful way that we can do creativity. This is like where Pixar comes from. That's fine. But yeah, if you look at casual creativity, I should have changed the heading on this. This should be casual creativity. Think of somebody who is, instead of like making a job out of this, they're looking for an alternative to Angry Birds for 15 minutes. Like the bus is going to come in 15 minutes and they just want to like amuse themselves for a little while. This user is highly flexible. They're willing to make pretty much anything. Like, sure, I'll do Teapot Generator 5000, or no, I'm gonna do like Music Doodler 3000, or I'm gonna like make an emoji bot or something. And they're willing to consider many variants of that. They usually don't have a grand vision in their mind, or if they do have a grand vision in their mind, they're often easily distracted from it. So we had a lot of users on Spore who would write about using the Spore Creature Creator and be like, so I was going to make Pikachu, and then I got distracted by the limbs, and now I have this like many-limbed monstrosity that started out as a Pikachu, and now I don't know what it is. But they're actually often very happy about that ending. They're willing to be pretty playful. One place where they're not flexible is they don't have money or time. And so a lot of these tools are either free or very inexpensive, and you have to be able to onboard them before the bus comes. So like very low barrier to entries there. I'm gonna escape out for just a sec so I can like move this thing. Okay, cool. Yeah, so it's different from professional creativity, and I think our tools are gonna end up being different. So the rest of the talk will really be about how you build these tools. And yeah, I needed a term to identify these. So I came up with the term casual creators because it's got, it's catchy. You can say like, oh, this tool is a casual creator. There's a casual creator in this game. This character creator is a casual creator. This like, oh, some of these historical pieces of artwork are casual creators. Like Kid Pix, if anybody has ever played Kid Pix, is a really good example of a casual creator. It lets me draw a line around things that you might think, or that you might not think are related. So like, how are Instagram and Kid Pix and weird music creation apps all, how do they, and like the World of Warcraft character creator, how are those all the same? And it turns out they're actually the same in a lot of useful ways. So why bother? Why do casual creativity? You're not going to get like grand creativity out of this. You're not going to get like world-changing stuff. So to quote P.T. Barnum, it's because there's a sucker born every minute. Except that he didn't actually say this. This is from a rival of his that wrote false quotes from him. What he actually said was a lot of like really nice things about like the noblest art is that of making others happy. A lot of the folks in this stream are probably doing video games, and so I don't actually really have to convince you that like entertaining people is an end in itself. If people play through Katamari Damacy and they've made nothing of value, they had a good time. If they play through Teapot Generator 3000 and they have a virtual teapot that is of no value to anyone, they had a nice time doing that. So these are, the word for this is autotelic. It's a Greek word meaning for its own purpose. So if you need to say like, I'm making autotelic creativity software, it's for the experience of doing something. I don't know if anybody out there in the stream has friends who do quilting or pottery or crochet, but you know that like if you do pottery, you have a massive stack of pottery that you try to give away to all your friends. You're not doing pottery because you deeply need more dishes and IKEA is sold out. So it's like most hobbies, even crafty ones, are primarily autotelic and only secondarily to get the object out. There's also this really good quote from an essay on what creativity is. That's stupid people create too. Boring people make boring, terrible art, and that's not a bad thing. There's a reason not every parent has the Mona Lisa up on their fridge. It's because stack of Afghan squares and acrylic pour paintings feel so seen right now. Yes, acrylic pour paintings are the ultimate autotelic art. They're just so fun to make. And then you end up with a stack of them that you can't give away. But yeah, like, it is okay to have boring people make boring art, in the same way that it's okay to make games for people who are not terribly good at games. And so yeah, like, I actually take that as kind of a sacred mission, is like helping terrible people make terrible art. So let's make something to help casual users be creative. So again, we can go back to when people are creative. And when aren't people creative? So you may have run into these things in your creativity. Being undirected, like not knowing where to go next. Being trained to come up with the right answer. So I can't write fanfic because my fanfic isn't going to be as good as everybody else's fanfic. Being afraid of negative judgments, like what if I publish this thing and people say it's bad? Running out of ideas, like gosh, I can't even think of what a plot is. So there are different ways to get around this, like different little mind hacks. This is an possibly apocryphal story from Art and Fear. Will Wright used to use this example when he was talking about Spore. And this is the idea that if you have two ceramics classes and one group is going to be graded on the best single pot that they make, and the other group is going to be graded based on how many pots they make. If you make 100 pots, you get an A. Like, I don't care how bad the pots are. The second group actually ends up doing better because the first group will fuss over things. And so having that little, like, I'm going to measure you not on your quality lets people fail faster. And it turns out failing quickly is actually one of the primary generators of learning and improving. So yeah, it's unclear whether or not this experiment ever actually happened, or if it was just a little parable to go into the book. But I think we can experientially say that this seems to be true. Anybody who has ever taught undergrad game design knows that this is true. It's like one of the biggest things that you have to get undergrads to do is not try to make the greatest game that's ever been made, but to make a bunch of little crap games that they can actually finish so that they can improve, rather than having like the unfinished magnum opus that'll never actually complete. Yeah, people, it turns out there is no single group of people that is like magically creative all the time and is confident in everything. This is a book that Winston Churchill wrote after World War II. So with all of his complexity and problematic being of Winston Churchill, he was a guy who was at the top of his game. And then he retired and started watercolor painting. And he got freaked out by it because there was a big white canvas and anything he could do was wrong. And so he has this little anecdote that says, okay, well, one of his female friends came up in a motor car, looked at his blank canvas, slapped some blue on it, and says, now you can start. It's this idea of having the blank canvas is really scary. And so one hack you can do is to get away from the blank canvas. So yeah, can we make AI assistants that do these things? Like now we actually have an action list. Can we get AI assistants to help you with being undirected, help you get away from right answer, help you from being afraid of negative judgment? We can make an AI that says, heck yeah, you're doing great. And you know it's a lie because it's an AI, that's fine. But on Sport, we had this thing where when you would put an arm onto the creature, or like any part that you put on the creature, it would hold it up and be like, yeah, that's really great. And it turns out this little subtle reinforcement of like, I acknowledge you and you're doing fine, honey, is really powerful, and something that AI can do really, really well. Like just outputting a string of "you're doing great, honey" is not a significant programming task, but it has a really big effect. Running out of ideas, we can make AI. AI is really good at coming up with stupid ideas. It doesn't actually have a lot of context, but it can produce ideas, and then humans can figure out, like, is this a good idea? Is this a good idea, but if I change this thing, it's an even better idea? Or is this a terrible idea that, like, if I flip that on its head, it's got kind of some interesting stuff going on. So yeah. A lot of this, another funny anecdote about the Sport Creature Creator is the guy who designed that, Chaim Gingold, was a huge improv junkie. So he would like literally be taking advanced improv classes at UC Berkeley while designing the Sport Creature Creator. And so the Sport Creature Creator is like just larded with improv knowledge. Everything from like yes and, if you've ever heard that, acknowledgements, flexibility, all sorts of stuff from improv. It's just like a textbook implementation of improv, and it worked really great. We would get handwritten letters from people about like I had written myself off creatively, and the Sport Creature Creator makes me feel like I can be creative again. So like it's a very strong example of somebody solving that you suck at art problem. So it's unclear if we can say exactly why it succeeded, but we can say like the improv stuff helped a lot. So yeah, casual creators are interactive systems that should help this. Sorry, this is a Frankenstein talk. One of the things that works really well with casual creators that doesn't work as well in professional creators is generativity. So if we think about the needs of these professional creators, like we said, control, right? I need to be able to control everything. Well, generativity is kind of necessarily not about control. As you've seen from yours' stuff, he's got a lot of stuff that gives him really strong control over his generator. But there are also a lot of generators that are just like, if the Sport Creature Creator puts dots on the wrong part of the creature, I have no recourse on that. Like, I can change the shape of the creature and hope that the generator will give me different information. But mostly, like, I just accept that I don't have total control. And so casual users are much more flexible about this. I don't even know if it still ships in Photoshop anymore, but ever since the 90s, there's a filter called Mosaic, which is like, it just makes weird polygons all over your image that make it look like kind of extremely crappy stained glass. And that is like this is a very professional creativity tool that has this weird little casual creator in it that nobody would ever use the mosaic filter for proper work. But it still shipped anyway because it was fun. So this is kind of a lesson that even in like professional tools, you often get like these little casual creator moments. So yeah, generativity is great for a couple of reasons. It helps the user get to new solutions fast. So in the Spore Creature Creator, it takes so little time to generate, like so little time to have your creature be placed in front of you. So like as you're manipulating the thing, there's this massive back end of AI that does the mesh construction, the rigging, automated texturing, automated animation, all sorts of stuff. It's just like running anywhere from like on a millisecond level to like every time you refresh the creature. That's all being done behind the scenes. And so you can like playfully shitpost creatures to your heart's content, like dozens of times per minute. And it really lowers the barrier to trying out new things. It's like, if I'm making a new thing in Maya, it's very high risk for me to change anything in Maya because I'm probably going to break it. And so I start getting very conservative with my moves. If you have something where you can make big jumps safely, people make really big jumps. They get to new design spaces because there's no penalty for having a bad jump to if you make a terrible creature in Spore, that's fine. Just keep moving. We can constrain the situation to only good-ish solutions. So you can't actually make a broken creature in Spore. This was like a big design question in the team of like, oh, what if somebody makes, like, should we have creatures that, like, oh, your creature has limbs that are too long, so it's going to get tangled up in stuff, or your creature, like, their mouth can't actually reach the food because you put their arms too far forward. We ended up discarding a lot of that stuff, like a lot of the like heavily simulationist stuff, because we wanted to tell people that like their solutions are good enough. Like they can decide whether or not this creature is appropriate. If you make a creature that looks like a bicycle, we're not going to penalize you. That's amazing. So like mostly like we kind of took the penalties off of that and said like all your creatures are goodish. And also you can't you can't crash this thing. It's not like if anybody has made 3D printable objects, it is almost impossible to make a validly 3D printable object. Anything you do is going to break that. And so if you wanted to make like a 3D printed teapot maker, you would want something that like like, what do we know about 3D printed teapots? Okay, like they should have a flat bottom. The wall thickness should be like this much. The lid should fit on. Like maybe do some fluid dynamic simulation to figure out how the spout should go. If you have a constrained enough problem, you can add in sensible generativity such that any solution is valid. And this is really, like, this goes back to the improv thing. It makes a really safe creative space. Giving positive feedback. This is another great thing that generators can do. Like, you can have the like smiling and looking at it. You can have like text that's generated about how good your thing is. I'll talk a little about that later. And you can be surprising. Again, remember, this is autotelic. So like being entertaining is an important part of this. So for example, so here's an example of the 3D printing. This is a contract that I did for a 3D printing startup. And the motivating example here was we went to another 3D printing place where people could draw on an iPad and then it would print out whatever you'd just drawn, just kind of like in a physicalized version of your scribble, just like extruding like along where your scribble was. And we watched people for a little while, and like kids would go up and would scribble something and be like, yeah, I want to print this out. And then they would get their mom or dad or grandma over and she'd be like, oh, I'm not good at drawing. I couldn't do this. And so the idea was to, how do we get something that anybody can, with their eyes closed, scribble something and make it look good. So, and have it be a valid 3D printable object. So I made this little pennant generator where you draw and then it reflects your lines around and extrudes them out in different ways. And that's an object that can be 3D printed very quickly. So that actually worked pretty successfully. So yeah, I've done just like a bunch of different casual creators. There we go. So yeah, this is one where you can ignore the music, but like you pick out different flowers and then it generates more flowers. The one at the bottom is something that I made where you just like draw weird lines and the lines come to life. You can't draw anything in particular with this. You can just kind of make weird scribbles that pop into existence. And then Google did the one above, which is a Google Doodle for Kandinsky's birthday, I think, where like you draw lines and the lines also kind of come to life in different ways. Generativity itself is a kind of hard thing to do sometimes. You saw with Joris is that he's got like a big pipeline and a lot of very learned wisdom from a lot of making these sort of like Zelda style puzzle levels. So how do you start making generators? I have this set of tools that I call the Generominos. So you can Google for Generominos. I'll paste a link into the tab. I would right now, but I don't know if, oh, do I have, here we go. Okay, so yeah, there's the link to the Generominos editor. This is the idea that, so I made these cards as a way to think through how generators work. So you have some input and you're working towards some output. So can people see my mouse if I move my mouse? I'm uncertain. Okay, cool. Oh, so some people can see my mouse and some can't. Okay. So over on the left-hand side over here, so this is a sample of, this is an artwork that I made with the Generominos to help me figure out how to use generativity in this particular pipeline. So I have a leap motion, and the leap motion is normally pretty hard to design for because all that you get out of it, instead of like a mouse where you get like clicks and positions, you get joint positions in a hand model. So joint positions, so it's called Generominos because it's like dominoes. You want to match up the symbols. And it's all about how data moves through a pipeline. So I have a bunch of vector data, and I can get the positions there. And then I can take a Voronoi diagram, if people are familiar with Voronoi diagrams. That basically gives you like regions around each point. It's actually what's driving the mosaic filter that I mentioned in Photoshop. And then I can draw some polygons around that and project it onto a screen. So this is one of those things where it's like, normally people take the leap motion data, which is like lots of hand tracking data, and it's like turn it into a button press, a button press, a button press. So generativity let me deal with the data as it is instead. So I've got a whole bunch of vertices, do something interesting and continuous with those vertices every frame, which is like, it draws these like weird crinkly spaces. This was really great. I took it to an art festival. Kids really loved it. People who are chemically altered really loved it. Some guy thought that his hands were stuck in the screen and he just had to be there for a while. So that was my best ever like art review of anything that I've ever made. But you don't get that unless you have a sort of like continuous update, and generativity gives you the ability to deal with like really any data. And so the whole point of the Generominos is like, what kind of data do you have coming in? All right, here are all these different ways to build generative pipelines off of that data. And then pretty much anything that you construct in that way like snaps together pretty quickly. So this project was built in an afternoon. So yeah, this is like a casual creator. Like they're creating images, or like, you know, something is happening and an art is coming out, but like you don't really have that much control, but it feels good. It's like it's just purely autotelic. Yeah, this is, why do I put music on all my stuff? Oh, right. Yeah, so this is another pipeline editor that I made. So this is something that I made for last ProcChan. This is, I'll have to find a link to this, but it's called Slider Toy. I put it up on itch.io. And the idea is that you have some source of numbers. And that number can be musical data, it can be hand tracking data, it can be face data, it can be like just like weird sliders. And then you have some sort of pipeline, whether that's creating, you can take those numbers and turn it into a train, you can take those numbers and turn it into a flower, but you just are basically like playing Legos. You're socketing one thing into another thing, and you can just like switch out which things are getting socketed into which other things, and you get different projects based on that. So if anybody's looking for a project, I would encourage you to grab Slider Toy and try editing on either like new data that goes in or new pipelines that come out on the other side. Like, what can you do with a bunch of numbers? You can make a lot of stuff with a bunch of numbers. But yeah, so some examples of casual creators. I just wanted to show y'all kind of some of the breadth of these things, because as I was doing this dissertation, like I realized, like, gosh, there are just like hundreds and hundreds and thousands of these things out there. So there's things like this cupcake baking or like cake pop baking app on the phone, where you just like drag different accessories onto your cake pops. This is a really interesting one. It's called Let's Create Pottery. And you can actually 3D print out the pottery that you make in this, which I like because the pottery wheel is also a casual creator, like the actual physical pottery wheel. It's like, it's got generativity, it's got interactivity, it's largely well, you can use it autotelically. It's got kind of that like ease and surprise, and even if you're just a fucked up human, you can get symmetrical pots. You can get kind of automated support of quality. This is a real cool group called Nervous System that, makes cool Voronoi generators. It's always Voronoi for some reason. Voronoi is just so handy for this stuff. Wolfram Tones makes like weird music stuff. Instagram is like a very subtle form of a casual creator where like, yeah, you are creative in taking your photos, but then you can put like goofy little stickers and filters on it. Kids craft stuff. The Spirograph, if anybody's used the Spirograph way back. Yeah, weird loom-like things. This is what I had as a kid. It's called the Barbie Knit Magic, which is like you just crank, like you wrap yarn around it and you crank it, it makes a tube. So it's an automated knitting apparatus. But I really like this. This is like the most casual creator of advertisements. Like, the fun is in the making. Even things like paint by number kits. Like, you're not making a painting that doesn't already exist, but you're having fun while kind of doing something that maybe doesn't feel creative to a lot of us, but to the people who are doing it, feels creative. So yeah, like kind of the big thing behind this is you are exchanging control for power. So in the Spirograph, I can't draw everything, but I can draw one thing really, really well. And so every casual creator has a possibility space defined by its generative pipeline. This is the possibility space of what it can make. There's a lot of more stuff in my dissertation about how this works, but one of the key factors, and this is, people have found this concept really useful, I called it the grok loop. This is from a lot of different UI theory. And this is the idea of when I'm interacting with a system, how do I understand how that system works? And so this is kind of a complicated like diagram, but basically like I have some model in my head. Let's say I'm using KidPix, and I'm like, okay, like, what does this tool do? It seems to have a picture of a tree, so maybe it's good for drawing trees. So I click on that. I suspect what's going to happen. I start drawing. So I've got my hypothesis. If you can see like the hypothesis, where's my mouse? I don't have a mouse anymore. Okay. I have a hypothesis, and then I have to actually execute this. So I have to click and drag, or like select the tool and drag. That seems pretty easy for that, but like, what if you're doing code? You have to like actually type the code in, you have to type it correctly. So the gulf of execution can be instantaneous and obvious, or it can be quite slow and arduous. And then the computer has to modify the model. So it has to like move through the algorithmic space, reinterpret that into an artifact. If this was Spore, it has to run like all those like giant back-end things of texturing and modeling. It has to then present that back to me. And then as a user, I have this gulf of evaluation that says, what do I think about this thing now? So if it's a Spore creature creator, I can like look at my creature and be like, oh, this is a good creature. So I can do that like instantly. What if you have something that generates novels or generates music or generates game levels? If you generate me like a Quake level, maybe it takes me 30 minutes to get some friends together and play through that level to evaluate it. So that's like a really large gulf of evaluation. And then I can get back and like, oh, my hypothesis was wrong. This actually did something different than I thought. So update my mental model, make a new hypothesis, and go around again. The faster you can get the grok loop going, the faster people can learn things. So for idle hands, the like hand gesture thing that I was showing you earlier, that had an instantaneous grok loop. You put your hand in front, something updates, you look at the thing, you move your hand, it updates again, like 100 times per second, or 60 frames per second or whatever like latency I had, you're running around this grok loop. So people can pick up interaction, like really bizarre interaction, if you've got a grok loop that's like under 100 milliseconds or so. When it starts getting longer, you know, if you can only make a hypothesis every 30 minutes, you can't go around this loop very fast. And so if you're making a casual creator or really like a lot of forms of UI, you're always looking at your gulf of execution and your gulf of evaluation and saying like, how can I shrink those down so my grok loops get shorter? Just always get a shorter grok loop. So I wanted to show you some design patterns that, because I drew a circle around these things, I could see these patterns getting used across this. This is the idea of design patterns just being like reusable solutions that apply in a lot of situations. So yeah, things like there being a possibility space and like different kinds of possibility spaces. So I coined a term called 10,000 bowls of oatmeal, which is the idea that like sometimes your generator can make lots of unique things that our experience is all the same. So if you have 10,000 bowls of oatmeal and each one of them is molecularly quite distinct, the user is still going to perceive them as 10,000 bowls of oatmeal. And so No Man's Sky and Spore both suffered from this problem a lot, where like the planets, we could make as many planets as you wanted, but they all kind of felt the same. And so if you see the thing down at the center, you might have different generators that make things. It's like mostly everything is very like bland. So that might be good for like a Diablo style level generator, where it's like the level itself is not the star of the show. Like the fights are the star of the show, and all I need for a level is for it to not be broken. But you might have things where it's like mostly everything is bad or terrible, and there's a couple of really exceptional things. And so things like Dwarf Fortress, where like you're mostly surfing through really strange or boring stuff to try to find like the one really good story to surface. So there's no bad generator. It's just like you have to make good design decisions to deal with the sort of texture you have. Like, is it mostly bland? Is it mostly okay? Is it like everything is either great or terrible, or great or terrible, or great or terrible? You can make different design choices for that. So yeah, I'll just skip over this stuff. So yeah, these are a couple of the ones that I go over in my dissertation, but things like blank slates are really bad, and so things like prompts are actually really important. You may have seen some of these things go around Twitter, like having mermaid or change a word challenges, or safety is also kind of an interesting thing. So if anybody's played Cranium, which is like had some Pictionary kind of stuff, they make impossible design challenges, like draw this with your eyes closed. And that way everybody is equally terrible. There's no way to succeed elegantly. And so it kind of frees you up from trying to be good at things. Possibility space annotation. This is if you have a really big generative space, you can have people document it. And people actually really enjoy doing this. There was a group of people in the 90s who, if you ever played Freecell on like Windows 95, it only had 32,000 seeds. And so people documented every single card deal in that generative space, whether or not it was winnable. And they found out that, in fact, all of them, except for one, was. You can also self-promote through things. This is a really great one for indie games. So if you think about Minecraft, nobody ever shared Minecraft saying how great Minecraft was. They always shared, like, look at this amazing video of me being cool in Minecraft. For a while, 2 years ago, probably all of your Twitter feeds ended up looking like this Opus Magnum illustration. Opus Magnum was a great game. It was very good, but it had this automatic GIF maker. So when you came up with a clever solution, you just saved it as a GIF, and then that encouraged you to post it directly to Twitter. AlphaBear as well, mostly not a casual creator, but you would find words in these little word searches, and then at the end of the level, it would give you a little casual creator to slot those words into sort of funny little statements, and then you could automatically post to Twitter how clever you were. So this is, every time I would post something clever on AlphaBear, I would be advertising how cool I am, but I would also be like advertising AlphaBear, and there would be a link to, you see there's like a little link, get AlphaBear. So that was really great for letting them get a lot of mileage out of marketing. I'll skip kind of to the end because I want to get some questions in. yeah, you can encourage sharing. So like ways for people to share. Fantastic Contraption actually had, you could share your link as or you could share your solution as a link. And so anywhere that you could paste a link, which is pretty much the entire internet, you could also paste this. The Sport Creature Creator, you actually had your whole creature stenographically embedded in a PNG. And so people would post PNGs on a forum and then drag them into the Sport Creature Creator. So I have a Sport Creature in my dissertation that's embedded as a PNG, and you can drag something from a dissertation PDF into Spore, and it is a valid creature. So that's pretty exciting. So yeah, see, just different ways of transforming stuff. So a lot of like weird transformations happen. This actually works really great for machine learning. So like this is Alex Champendard's project, Neural Doodle, where you can like draw something kind of MS Paint style and it'll use machine learning to fill it in. The great example of this is Edges to Cats, where you can doodle a cat and it'll fill it in. And then because it's so fast, people started getting really weird with it and making kind of playful stuff. Yeah, signifiers like emojis, like things where people can combine two things and they get exciting by their juxtaposition, or people can express themselves kind of through, like you can kind of think of Legos. Like Legos have a lot of blocks that allow you to like build structurally interesting stuff. And then they also have a lot of blocks that's like, oh, if I put like the dragon piece on top of whatever I built, suddenly it's a dragon thing, or like this is a castle piece, or this is a space piece. So you can like build your kind of chewing gum construction and then add little signifiers that give you like more meaning. Entertaining evaluations, this is the last one I'll do, is just like computers saying amusing things. So Roller Coaster Tycoon, like the entertaining evaluation there is like, if you make something terrible enough, you get lots of blood splatters and vomits as you like kill lots of people. But you can also have like your friends evaluate your stuff. So TKO is a game where like you make t-shirts and then combine them, and then your friends vote on which one is good. Art School just came out recently. It's got an angry AI art teacher, and you make like terrible paintings, and it evaluates your paintings in a completely random way, with lots of like art blarf. So yeah. All right, anyway, there's lots of casual creators in games, and just because I'm out of time, I'd like you to encourage you to think of like where you could put casual creators in a game that you're making. So like, you know, are there like places that you can put things? So yeah, I'll just switch over to questions now. In conclusion, we do know a lot about creativity. We can make AI systems that help creativity. And yeah, have a zine. Yeah. Let's see if there are any questions, and if I can figure out how to activate Zoom's questions. Q&A, there we go. Okay. Yeah, okay. I read Simon's Sciences of the Artificial a while back, and it made me realize that nothing we do with a computer is natural. So everything we make with a computer is in some way creative. Yeah, creativity is a term that can kind of mean everything or nothing as much as you like. Are there any other questions? Yeah, I'm trying to think of like the assignments that I would give as well. Like if you have a game that you're making, consider, you know, is the user creating something, whether it's a solution or now that Twitch exists, like pretty much any gameplay, it can be a creative expression. So how are you allowing users to kind of share their creativity through their game? If it's like, well, you can record it and like post it somewhere, that's cool. But if you can somehow get them to do that with a link to your game, like with the Spore PNGs or the Fantastic Contraption ones, or Magnum Opus, those are all really like really strong. Let's see. So we got a question. Is there a line between casual and I guess not casual? It really depends. So a lot of professional people will be very controlling for certain things, and then it's actually a known problem with certain professional creativity of how do you get out of your ruts. So there's a deck of cards called Oblique Strategies that was made by the very famous musician Brian Eno, that are basically strange provocations to get him to be less professional. So it's things like make a brick and not a wall, do something you hate, like that but slower. So things to, like, it's basically an automated generative system that's giving him certain casual creator properties. And so a lot of times you'll have even professional people who move sort of back and forth between control and chaos as part of the art practice. Hope that answered that. Sorry, I'm running out of voice. Do people tend to be more creative when anonymous, just in regards to sharing, but still want people to see it? Interesting. I don't know. I don't have a good answer on that. We see through like the environmental creativity stuff that I mentioned early, that people making stuff to share with each other tends to be a big motivator. You know, there are things like Twitter art jams. So if anybody participated in Mermaid, or I think the current one is Dogist, where you're supposed to draw dogs and share them on Twitter. So people seem to enjoy doing that, or like kind of making little creative gifts back and forth. So that's all non-anonymous, and powered by non-anonymousness. Say that 3 times fast. But yeah, I would think that like maybe in certain areas there are, and it's like there's anonymous in the larger world and there's anonymous in my group. So I've been like reading a lot of fanfic, and a lot of fanfic is like fairly juicy stuff. And so there's probably a lot of people who like don't share their creativity in that space with their family, but they have a pseudonym and everybody knows their pseudonym. And whenever like Raven67 posts something new, everybody, like people who follow that sort of work can follow that person. And so you can have anonymous in one sphere that gives you kind of safety from certain aspects, and then you can still have fame in your creativity sphere. But then like there might be things that like even Raven67 doesn't want associated with their names. They might create a burner account to post that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think there's different levels of anonymity that may be of use. Are there some areas that are off bounds for creativity, casual creativity? I don't think there are. I think there are things that, I talk about this in my dissertation a little. There are things that have a really long grok loop, or a really hard grok loop. And so things like coding, generative novels, and level design are often things that have very slow grok loops. And so you just have to be kind of partial or very clever about how you give feedback. And it's not a perfect casual creator, but you can kind of start getting there. Yeah, I would say like kind of just from a design standpoint, those are the ones that are hardest to make. There are plenty of game design editors or like game makers, and they've always kind of sucked in different ways. And Mario Maker is doing really well, but also kind of sucks in some ways. So game makers is like I could write a whole dissertation on just like the history of game making software and how it like sometimes succeeds and sometimes doesn't. But it's definitely like a casual creator for games is one of the hardest ones to do. So yeah, hopefully that was a question you were asking, as opposed to like off bounds, like, you know, are just too serious, like casual creators for like designing like 3D printed organs. Maybe. Can you expand on evaluating the results of casual creativity? Let's see. Yeah. So yeah, one of the things that I talked about in my dissertation defense, because I had Catherine Isbister, who's like an amazing HCI person who does a lot of really stunning evaluations on like non-normal experiences with interactive software. She specializes in emotional and social HCI. But I wasn't able to do much in the way of evaluation, just because it's not my field and I just didn't have time. But I think there are a lot of things that people care about with casual creativity. And so for each one of those things that are important, it would you could evaluate that. So, do I care about this sort of like churn within an environmental creativity thing? Like, how much are people getting influenced by each other? Like, how much, Spore tracked which creatures were getting used to make which other creatures. So you could do some sort of purely network-based thing of like, how often are people starting with a blank slate, and how, yeah, okay. So we should wrap this up, but yeah. Yeah, there are a ton of different ways you could evaluate casual creators, and you just kind of look at what is meaningful about a casual creator and lean into that. So like autotelic evaluations, how do you evaluate pleasure? Philip posts one anecdote to share. We had a generator that was seeded by a text string. Yep, yeah, using seeded stuff allows people to map things really well. In RimWorld, there are whole like posted things of people mapping different RimWorld seeds. Like, so if you want to play something with a waterfall and spiders, you can find a waterfall and spiders. Yep. Casual creators with a sensible natural language input. Gosh, I can't even imagine Facade. Facade is the only one I can think of with a natural language input, and that's very loosely a casual creator because you're kind of creating little dramatic situations. But something where like you just type in like a red pot with blue finials, and then it generates the red pot with blue finials. There's probably some casual. Oh no, some of the GAN stuff. Yep. Yeah. Oh, and somebody points out Inform 7 maybe as well. So yeah, there's some. It's hard. that would be a really interesting design phase to work with. So yeah, I think we're gonna wrap up because I'm 5 minutes over. Feel free to ping me on Twitter.